And that connects with the possibility of the Antichrist being one of these beings produced in a lab, or being the son of a woman that has a special connection with a certain bloodline. And because a certain woman having connection with a certain bloodline, and that woman might have, without the help of a technology, she might have given birth to a man that is among us, and he might be the Antichrist. So, if you go to the Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls, you're gonna have several books. You have the book of the Giants, Jubilees, and all these books will talk about this topic of the Nephilim and the giants, in how they inflicted pain in those days, and they were so perverted. And then there is this. In Genesis 6, 1 through 4, there was an attempt to change the DNA, the human DNA. And if Satan and his compadres were able to change human DNA and God did nothing, what God promised in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, that from the seed of the woman, the Messiah would come. So if they had succeeded in Genesis 6, 1 through 4, then Genesis 3:15 would never happen. So God had to destroy them. Okay? Now, of course, we see the question of the Nephilim, the Watchers, in both First Peter, Second Peter, and Jude. But let's talk a little bit about exactly that, the New Testament reception. The New Testament does not extensively develop the Nephilim tradition, but several passages presuppose it. For example, Jude, verse 6, refers to the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling. 2 Peter 2:4 similarly alludes to angels who sinned and were cast in Tartarus. So when you read 2 Peter 2:4 and talks about the angels who sinned, you then understand that the apostles themselves were had the Septuaginta in their hands, and every reference to the Old Testament was not necessarily to the Hebrew text, but to the Greek text. What is interesting, and of course Peter is correct because he was illuminated, inspired by the Holy Spirit, is that the angels, the fallen angels, which are called Bnei Elohim, and in Psalm 82 they are called gods, they sinned and they were cast into Tartarus. In some of your Bibles, we will actually say hell, but it's Tartarus. Do you know what this means? That next time that you read Greek mythology, you should pay more attention. Because all that craziness of Greek mythology probably is not craziness. So you need to read Greek mythology with a little bit, a grain of salt. But by reading First Enoch, you almost feel a compulsion to read the Greek mythology to see what they were seeing, how they were living, because even though let me say put this way, even though with the flood most of the Nephilim died and the Watchers, the fallen angels, the fallen gods, were sent to Tartarus, reality is this. One of few things could have happened. Maybe some of them survived the flood. There is a place in Russia where there is a mountain in Russia that there are some structures that are believed to be portals to a different dimension. It's completely restricted. You will never get close to it. So what some legends say is that when the enemy, our enemy, kind of understood what God was attempting to do, he and his compadres, the watchers that didn't have sex with the women, constructed these portals and transported the Nephilim to another dimension until after the flood and then brought them back. Crazy, crazy idea, but is a possibility. The other possibility that is actually very possible, a possibility that is very possible, is that beyond the three transgressions and rebellions that we read in Genesis, there may have been other rebellions. So the rebellions that I'm talking about is Genesis 3, Satan himself, Genesis 6, the Watchers, and Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel, and the sons of God that messed up. So after all of, so after Genesis 3, Genesis 6, we see in Genesis 11 a new rebellion. And we might have seen a fourth rebellion where more watchers came down and actually had sex with the women, and other Nephilim were born. Do we have evidence for that? Of course not. But we have these possibilities. What it is, we don't know. Reality is this: God brought the deluge. God brought the flood, and the reality is that afterwards, the Nephilim were back, and they will come back. Understand this: they will come back because Jesus said so, and we're gonna cover that. Okay, let me go to a profile of anomalous characteristics. Characteristics that are different, that does not apply to humans. Okay, so the most developed Old Testament Antichrist typology appears in Daniel. The little horn of Daniel 7 is described as possessing a mouth speaking great things. Do you know somebody that does that? In waging war against the saints. And the saints here are actually the Jews, at least part of them, in a manner that exceeds ordinary human ambition. So we have a president that can be extremely boastful. You multiply that by 1,000, and that's the Antichrist. So I don't think Trump is the Antichrist. Okay? I don't think Baron Trump is the Antichrist. I have the book that refers to, were written in 1956 or whatever, that refers to Baron Trump. He's not the Antichrist. Now, in Paul, in 2 Thessalonians 2, 1 through 12, Paul will refer to this person as the man of lawlessness. Paul's description of the man of lawlessness in 2 Thessalonians 2 is the most theologically dense Antichrist text in the New Testament. Several features of this description are anomalous in the subject if the subject is conceived as an ordinary human being. Meaning, what Paul describes in 2 Thessalonians 2, 1 through 12 does not fit a human being. It's basically an impossibility. So let's go through three of these arguments. First, he, the Antichrist, is described as the son of destruction, the same designation applied to Judas, the one that betrayed God, in John 17:12, a figure often associated in early tradition with demonic possession or superintendence. So when you look at Judas Iscariot, basically what you will see is an individual, a human being, that was either possessed or it was extremely profoundly influenced by Satan, to the point that after 3 years being with Jesus, he was capable of betraying Jesus. That man, he was either completely possessed or he was extremely influenced by Satan. So you start seeing this kind of connection, that for somebody to be extremely evil in relation to, here I'm talking about theology, not a general history, like Hitler, for example. So theologically speaking, biblically speaking, for somebody to be pure evil, that person is either possessed or highly influenced by Satan himself. And that connects with who the Antichrist will be and the influence of Satan upon his life. Second, his coming, and this is very interesting, the Antichrist coming in 2 Thessalonians 2 is also called parousia. You start seeing that when we talk about the Antichrist, what he's trying, or what he will try to do, is imitate everything in relation to Jesus Christ. So even Paul in 2 Thessalonians 2, 1 through 12, will say that his coming, he uses the word parousia, is said to be by the activity of Satan with all power and false signs and wonders. And when Paul says that, what he's saying is this: with the exception of Jesus Christ as the Son of Man, Son of God, the true Messiah, nobody on earth and in history has done what the Antichrist will do. The power of Satan will be with him. Now, so this kind of language that is structurally parallels the parousia of Christ, suggesting a supernatural origin event rather than a simple human birth. So when you get the word parousia used to Christ, it is a supernatural event. When you get the word parousia, and Paul did this on purpose, and you get the word parousia in relation to the Antichrist, it must be a supernatural event. And it is interesting, because the word parousia, when used in relation to Christ, means that Christ is in heaven and he comes down. What you will see is that the Antichrist, the spirit of the Antichrist, is not in heaven, but is in Hades, and it comes up. Hanging there. Third and most significantly, the man of lawlessness opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. This act of self-deification goes beyond human hubris. It represents a cosmological claim to divine ontology that makes most sense if the being making it possesses at least a partial divine nature. The idea is this: every emperor in the past wanted to be God. Saddam Hussein was called the Son of God. And when Trump posts whatever he posted a couple of days ago, it's because he wants to be God. That's the truth. He's not ashamed. He gave the most lame excuse. That was lame. That he was a doctor with the Red Cross. That's pathetic. Not only that post was offensive to Christians, even though I think he was not trying to represent Christ, he was trying to represent himself as God. But that post is freaking racist, because everybody in that post that you can actually see the face is white. There's not one brown, there's not one black person. That was on purpose. That's just me talking. So the fact that he calls himself God goes beyond what every human being has done in the past and even in the future. Now, the beast in Revelation 13. The beast of Revelation 13 is the most elaborated description of the Antichrist figure in the canon. So when you get Revelation 13, which comes right after what? Revelation 12, and the dragon makes war in heaven, goes after the woman, makes a third of the angels fall, meaning they lost the war, they lost the battle, and they were trampled according to Daniel. And then Revelation 13 basically gives this description of this Antichrist, which is the most elaborated in the Bible. And it is interesting that goes back or takes us back to Daniel 7, because in this description, the Antichrist has an appearance of lion, bear, leopard, and also 10 horns, which is very, 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 very interesting. Now, Revelation 13:3 describes a mortal wound that was healed, was kind of a resurrection motive that many pastors have a problem with. But the reality is that the Antichrist will try even to imitate the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, do you know what is very, very, very interesting as I was thinking about this thing is this. The reason why, well, let me put it this way. When Jesus died on the cross, he won he won the battle against sin. When he rose from the dead, he won the battle against death. This Antichrist and the Satan behind him have still in their hands the control over sin and the control over death. So when the Antichrist is wounded in the head, basically what happens is that because of his Lord's control, Satan's control over sin and death, he will be able to basically live again. So this is not a small wound that he will receive. This is a mortal wound. And Satan will say, no problem, because I still have control over death, and you shall not die. So that's the kind of a crazy supernatural stuff that are going to be happening during the Great Tribulation. Now, look at this here. Revelation 17:8 sharpens this idea further of the resurrection of the Antichrist imitating the resurrection of Christ. The beast was and is not, and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. The bottomless pit is consistently in Revelation the placement of imprisonment of demonic beings. Specifically, Revelation 9:1 through 11, the place of demonic watchers. This is the Tartarus. So the beast emerges in Revelation 13:12. The beast's emergence from the abyss structurally parallels the release of imprisoned supernatural beings, suggesting that the Antichrist is not born in ordinary human sense, but released and reconstituted from a state of prior spiritual imprisonment. If the Antichrist is Nephilim, his spirit does not come from God. You see, when the Nephilim were born in Genesis 6:1 through 4, God didn't give to those bodies spirits. The spirits were given by the watchers. What I'm saying here is this. When potentially Satan, because Satan didn't have sex with women, when potentially Satan have sex or already had sex with a woman, the spirit given to that being that was born, which is a hybrid, is not any spirit, but is a spirit that was in Tartarus, imprisoned in Tartarus. Because when it says that the beast comes out of the abyss, it must come from Tartarus. And who is in Tartarus? The watchers. So the spirit of the watchers, one watcher most likely, maybe the most potent watcher, is the spirit that will be within the body of the Antichrist. And that is why the Antichrist will have so much power, an amazing power. The whole great tribulation is the wrath of God. Because from day one, when the Antichrist reveals himself doing signs and wonders, he will be acting in the full power of evilness directly from the bottom of hell.